Hi, thanks for joining us for our first evening of Real Lives Online. Welcome. My name is Martin Ayres. I'm the senior pastor of St Silas Church, and we're hosting these 3 evenings of Real Lives. And tonight our guest is Emma Scrivener, who is the writer of a couple of books, A New Name and A New Day. And we'll come to that interview in a moment, but first of all, just to introduce it, I just wanted to mention what we've got coming up the next couple of nights. Tomorrow night, we're interviewing Keiran Dodds, who is an exceptional photographer, and he's particularly going to talk a bit about the inspiration behind a couple of his projects. One of them is Gingers, which has had a lot of media attention over the last couple of months, and the other one is one photographing trees and forests in Ethiopia. And there's some fascinating stories behind that and what inspired Keiran to do that as he shares about his work. So I hope you can join us. Then on Friday night, we're with Billy McCurrie, who I've known for a few years now. Billy has an absolutely gripping life story, a story that begins with deep-rooted anger that led him into terrorism and heading into prison, and then him hearing about Jesus, becoming a Christian, and ultimately that journey leading him to, he's now a Baptist minister, having been a terrorist, and he's just going to share with openness and honesty about growing up in Northern Ireland and the Troubles, and then where he's ended up and how. So I hope you can join us on Friday. Now, in each of those 2 evenings, tomorrow night and on Friday night, we're going to have a live Q&A because the evening will be live. So you'll be able to submit questions that I can pitch to Keiran and then to Billy. Tonight with Emma, we'd hoped to do that, but actually we couldn't meet her live, and instead I've already caught up with her, and shortly we're going to play that interview. The format each evening is the same: 7:45 start, then the interview with questions, and then a short reflection from me, and we finish at 9 o'clock. Just wanted to mention as well that at the end of this week, we this Sunday are having Back to Church Sunday. And we're inviting you, whoever you are, whether you've been to church lots of times or never been before or not been for many years, why not join us? At the moment, St Silas is all online, and this Sunday we'll be live streaming on our YouTube channel at 11 and 6:30. And we'd love you to join us for Back to Church Sunday on one of those services this Sunday. Tonight, let's catch up with Emma. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over, and we can enjoy watching this interview with Emma together. So, welcome, Emma. Emma is someone that I've met several times and actually used to serve in a church with Emma's husband, Glenn. But Emma, not everyone will know you. Tell us a bit about what keeps you busy these days. What are you up to?
Hi folks, it's lovely to be with you this evening, and thank you for taking the time to tune in. It is exciting to be doing this with you, particularly as the excitement of my life for the last year or so has been being locked in a small house with 2 toddlers, one of whom is Mr. Noisy and one of whom is Mrs. Chatterbox. And they're a lot of fun, but I tell you what, at night time I go to bed and I sleep well. So yes, I'm married to Glenn. We live in Eastbourne, which is just down from London near the coast, and we have a cat as well called Balthazar. And my husband's an evangelist, and I'm mainly mumming at the moment, but do a wee bit of writing, a wee bit of blogging, a wee bit of speaking.
Great. Thanks, Emma. And Kathy and I have both really enjoyed and benefited from your books previously. Tell us where you're from. Obviously, it's not a Scottish accent, but it's not an Eastbourne accent either. So, where are you from? And tell us what you know about Scotland or Glasgow, whether you've ever been to Glasgow.
Oh, yes. Well, I like to think that if you were going to compare my accent to anything else, you would say the nearest would be Scottish. I would take that very well. And as you, I'm Irish from Northern Ireland, from sunny Belfast. And we have a great love for the Scots in Ireland. I think you know that already. And my brother is married to a Scots lass. So I've been to Scotland many times. It's a great place. And obviously, talk about a generalization, but I think there are a lot of a lot of parallels. I think we have a similar kind of outlook on life, a similar kind of black kind of realism, humor, says it like it is, kind of bit of grumpiness there, likes a laugh, all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, so it's lovely to be with you in Scotland.
Great. So let's come on to we're going to think a bit about mental health. It's been massively in the news. I mean, I'm struck by it seems to be exponential, the amount of media attention as we go through these restrictions and the pandemic. It already was a big topic, but now the need for people to think about the mental health impact of the pandemic, an awareness of how many people are struggling, and we want to think about how to find hope and positive mental health. But we also want to think about your own story in that, Emma, and we're grateful for your willingness to share that. So let's go back to nearly a year ago now, when there was a virus in China, and then the news started to be, that there may be cases in Europe, and then suddenly there was an escalating concern over a number of weeks. This news that we're not in control of this virus. We've got to wash our hands carefully. We've got to keep our distance from one another. Tell us a bit about how that evoked memories for you.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, I think you're absolutely right. First of all, that I think a lot of people struggle with mental health anyway. But I think particularly during a pandemic situation, there's a lot of triggers there for a lot of people and a lot of different reasons. I'll tell you a little bit about my background that will help you to understand maybe. So whenever I was growing up, part of a very happy family, very secure, very content, not a family of Christians, but very, very loving and no big issues. But whenever I turned 13, some of the things in my life started to change, and nothing really dramatic, but things that were big for me. You know, I lost my granddad. He died. He was the first person I loved who had died. I was being bullied at school. My body was changing, but it didn't look the way, you know, women were meant to be looking, the way that I'd heard about it. I started going along to church, but the God I heard about wasn't the God of the Bible. It was kind of this headmastery God who wanted you to keep lots of rules. And that suited me fine because I've always been a bit of a rule keeper. You know, if you'd met me when I was young, I'm someone who I like to have a list of things I need to do and to tick it off. I like things to be neat and tidy and within the lines. So as a wee girl, when I went to nursery school for the first day, I shooed everybody out of the sand pit and I smoothed the sand down, and I spent the whole day guarding the sand pit to keep the lines nice and clean. And that, in a sense, is who I am. So when all of these changes came up for me when I was 13 or so, I didn't know how to cope because I felt like I was a real mess. I felt like I was spilling out of the sandpit, you know, like I was red wine that had been poured on this lovely white carpet. My sense of who I was just blown apart. And I had millions of questions, which to me felt like mess. You know, who am I? What does it mean to be a woman? Who is this God that I'm sort of following, and what does he want from me? What happens, you know, when you die, like you lose someone like my granddad? Millions and millions of questions that people didn't seem to be able to answer. And as I say, it felt like I was really messy, and my body was changing as well. And it felt like my body too was kind of spilling out in areas where it hadn't been before. It, you know, it wasn't like the shape that it used to be. And I didn't know, but it didn't look the way it was meant to look on TV. So I guess what happened was, it wasn't that I developed an eating disorder, anorexia, but it wasn't really that I looked in the mirror and I thought, oh, I need to lose weight specifically where I feel fat. I felt like I was a mess. I felt like I was leaking outside of my body, and there was too much of me. I was too intense for everybody. You know, too many questions, too many feelings, wanted too many things, and no one could match those. No one could give me answers or enough of what I wanted. And so it seemed to me that if I shrunk my body, because there's not much a 13-year-old can control outside of, you know, what they eat and their own body. But if I shrunk my body, I could kind of shrink all those fears. And instead of worrying about a million and one different things, life and death and everything in between, I just had to worry about one thing. And it was, could I make myself smaller? Could I lose weight? And I could do that. I was really good at it. So that was the beginning of a sort of a very long struggle with anorexia. And I got treatment for it. But while I was getting treatment for anorexia, I developed obsessive compulsive disorder. And I remember my mum at the time going, Emma, is there any disease, any mental illness you have not got? Because I had anxiety and depression, all sorts of things. But what was actually going on there was the same sort of feelings and fears were coming out in different ways. And that's quite common with mental health struggles. So if you're someone who struggles with something and you're finding a way to deal with it, quite often something else will bubble up to the surface. And it doesn't mean that you've got 101 different issues. It just means that they're trying to find different ways of expression. So for me, the OCD is, it's not like, you hear on TV, like, I'm a bit OCD because I like to have things neat and tidy around the house.
Sure.
OCD is not like that at all. It's a life dominating compulsion where you have these terrible fears that are only assuaged by doing repetitive thinking, thoughts, or actions. For me, it was hand washing, it was being clean. And that's the only thing that makes it go away. And in your head, it doesn't really make sense, but you can't stop yourself because the anxiety is so great. So this need for control, this fear of germs and contamination and of the world, which seemed very dangerous. I grew up in Northern Ireland, and this was the time of the Troubles. There was a lot of political unrest, and there were literally bombs going off on a weekly basis, people being blown up and being killed. And so, it did feel like the world was very dangerous. And we were hearing as well about a disease called AIDS. You might have seen the program recently, It's a Sin, that's been on TV talking about the AIDS epidemic. And one of the things it points out was just how frightened people were at the time, because we didn't understand what it was or how you could get it. You were just told, just don't. And I remember those terrifying TV ads about, again, this scary disease you could get. So add all of those things up, this feeling of mess, the scary virus that's out there, a world that seems unsafe, internal questions, and you get someone who's really, really stressed and really trying to take back control. And so this time round, as an adult, when we hear about the coronavirus, that triggers an awful lot of things for me, because a lot of the things that I was told to help deal with my OCD, for example, there is no disease out there that you can get. You're not going to, you're not going to, if you don't wash your hands properly, you're not going to harm somebody that you love. Or, you need to stockpile things like soap or toilet roll. Well, we were getting the very opposite message of that, aren't we? Because here's a situation where if you do get sick, you're being told you could kill granny. You have to wash your hands repeatedly over and over in a certain way. The world is a dangerous place, and there is a sickness out there that you can get, and people don't know very much about it. And you do need to maybe hoard toilet roll or other things to make your world safe. You do need to bunker down, and you do need to take control of what you can take control of, because everything is terrifying. And so that then was that means that it's a very difficult time for me and others, I think, like me, who were experiencing all sorts of mental health issues, whether that is with addiction or with depression, anxiety. We're becoming very isolated from other people. There's a lot of fear. We've lost routines, things that help us to fit into normality. We lost relationships, and that's a big trigger, a big concern for many, many people, including those who've never had mental health issues before, but certainly for those who do and have.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Emma. So that last part about being cut off from people is quite interesting as well, isn't it? And why is that such a big issue? I mean, I can see, that being told to stay at home, so many people now working from home. I mean, you've described your household, which is pretty busy right now, and ours is pretty busy with 3 children. But lots of guys I know are living on their own. And then when we do meet friends, we stay away from them. There aren't the hugs or the kind of, even just the handshakes there might have been. So how does that play into it, the kind of lack of as much contact and conversation?
Well, I mean, it's vital to being human, isn't it, to be in relationship with others. I would describe myself as an introvert. My husband is an extrovert to the nth degree. So I would always have said, look, I'd be very happy with lockdown. I'd be very happy to just, hole up by myself. But even I'm finding that is not at all the case. We are made to be in relationship, I think, with God and with others. And those relationships are part of what makes us who we are. to see the people that we love, to talk to them. It's part of how we understand ourselves and what's going on, isn't it? So having those things cut off it's absolutely massive. It goes to the heart of who we are. It threatens our very sense of self. Um, and it's difficult for so many reasons. As you say, people are in really different situations. A good friend of mine, she's single and she lives on her own, and she says, I would do anything for a hug. She said, I miss that physicality so much. I feel like I've had a limb cut off, and even just, she says I know that we have to avoid people because of the pandemic, but it goes to the heart of you when you see someone across the street and you cross over to avoid them, or they try to avoid you. Isn't that telling us something? We think, oh, there's something wrong with me, there's something wrong there. So all of those things, I think, are pretty fundamental. A rupturing of relationship. And I think as well with social distancing, particularly in the early days, we would confuse that or conflate that with distancing completely. So it should really be physical distancing, shouldn't it, rather than social distancing?
Yeah.
We need that social contact even more than
Yeah.
before. Um, uh, so we can physically distance, but actually it's vital that we are talking to other people and with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, that's so true, isn't it? I mean, that's very helpful. And I'm just thinking that social distancing is probably just a really bad term for the whole thing. I mean, we all knew what it meant, but really we want to keep socializing. Not, yeah. Okay. So we're going to think a bit more towards the end. I mean, you've written on your blog a bit last year about how to kind of to take some steps. I know there's no foolproof system, but take some steps to safeguard mental health in the situation. Do you think? Have you got any thoughts on how things have been different as the year has progressed? I mean, I just think that we found this last month. I said a few weeks ago, actually at church, that we were having to look out for the optimists, because the guys who last March, April were saying we'll still get summer holidays, and then by the summer we're saying we'll be out of this by the new year. I think we're really hit by the lockdown after Christmas and the news of the variant, and there's been a bit more despair in the mood, a lot of weariness, fatigue. Any thoughts on that? Have you picked up any of that? I'm not sure why, but it just seems to have affected us differently now
I
as
think that's
time's gone on.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mentioned this to you earlier. I think it is like film sequels where they get worse the further they go on. And Lockdown 3 is worse than Lockdown 2 or Lockdown 1, or at least it feels like that. I think there's different things that are going on. Just the length of time that we're having to deal with this. We've lost some of the first time round, there was a sense of novelty. We're all in it together. We can do this, we can get through it. There's a finite period. And I think now that everyone has discovered that they're not going to, bake the perfect sourdough loaf, or it's not going to give them, I've redone my kitchen now. Okay, now what? And having the kids at home, or the novelty of it has really worn off. And I think in many ways, mentally and emotionally, we do have a kind of a tank there that gets drained by different things, doesn't it? And lockdown's a big drain. That's a massive thing, and it just pushes you down a bit. And what I guess what I have noticed would be that, for me anyway, my levels of resilience are just a lot lower than they would have been a year ago. So if I'm, if one of the children does something to annoy me, I'm really having to work a lot harder not to get angry or not to feel upset about it in a way I didn't before. I've also found that our emotions are going sideways a bit. So you can find that something will happen and you'll be incandescent with rage, or you'll be in floods of tears, and really, what was it? It was that the coffee machine broke, or something, it doesn't really, okay, well, that is actually quite a big thing. But imagine it's something trivial. Um, and I think there's a lot of the emotion that comes from the pandemic and all of the different fears and things that are going on, and they come out in little sideways bits. So we're seeing a lot of that as well. I think as well we're moving from almost kind of anger, or a feeling of being energized, to a feeling of, like you say, of despair. So, think about a man who's trapped in a room. Um, for the first few minutes, first few hours, maybe he's going to bang on the doors, and he's angry, he feels energized, he's saying, "Get me out." He's thinking, "I'm going to get out of here, I'm going to get out of here." But give him a long, long time in that room, and he stops getting angry, he starts despairing, he gives up, the energy has gone. And I think, for me anyway, I'm feeling that, that yeah, just the fact that it's been going on for so long, and that sort of the energy that was with it at the beginning has been a bit lost. And just the gradual taking away of things over and over again. It's, I don't know about you, but I tend to, I love routines and things like that. So it feels like, there's one thing that's taken away, then there's another thing, then there's another thing, then there's another thing. And so that's very difficult. Plus, the Bible says hope deferred makes the heart sick. And if you have hope deferred for a Christmas which doesn't happen, or a holiday which doesn't happen, or seeing your first grandchild, or being able to say goodbye to someone who is really unwell, and that doesn't happen, that does make us sick to our souls in a very deep and damaging way.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. So we're going to come back to some of the ways you've written about that I found very helpful, thinking about how each of us as individuals can adapt to what we're going through. But before we get there, we're just going to spend a bit of time thinking about your story, and how things progressed for you. And I mean, you have written about how desperate things got for you. Can you just say a bit more? I mean, we don't obviously need all the details, but you've talked about how you were affected as a teenager, and that the underlying issues, things sprung up as OCD, as anorexia, but actually there was an underlying issue there. So could you just tell us about it? Came back, didn't it, in the as an adult?
It did. So, when I mentioned what was going on earlier as a teenager, I guess what happened was, I got a bit of counselling and therapy, which was helpful, but it really just focused on the physical, because this was Northern Ireland in the early 1990s, and really we didn't understand OCD or eating disorders and things the way that we do today. And if you lose a lot of weight, it's vital for you to get that weight back on, because your brain it's like your brain breaks down along with your body, and your thinking becomes polarized and distorted. It's called like the whirlpool effect, where the more weight you lose, and there are many different kinds of eating disorders, but speaking about my experience here with anorexia, the more weight you lose, the less able you are to think through it. So there's not much point in throwing counselling at someone who's very low weight until they get weight on. However, if the only thing that's focused on is your physical health, which is what happened with me, then you end up as I did at about age 18, which is fixed on the outside, but actually just as messed up. All the same questions, except now a whole load of guilt, because I put my family through absolute hell. I was worried that if I was my true self, people would be disgusted by me, and I would hurt those around me, and I really did do that. So it seemed to me like I really had to contain myself in a different way. And I threw myself into trying to prove myself in other areas. So religion was one. Again, I was thinking about this headmaster God. I went along to Bible college, and I talked a lot about the gospel of grace, but it felt like it was for other people, but not for me. It felt like I was talking about a God who was he could help other people, but he couldn't really help me, because actually I was a wee bit too messy. And anyway, I could probably fix myself if I was good enough. I was still working off that old model of God. And so I think what's interesting, before I had a really big relapse again as an adult, is it looked like I was doing really well. I was, pretty successful in married, pretty happy, getting good grades, doing well, looked pretty shiny from the outside, but really just that, as scared as I was when I was 13. And my husband was training to be a vicar. And it only dawned on me at the end of Bible college that that was going to make me a vicar's wife. And all the vicars' wives I know aren't just women; they are like super women. They're like women to the nth degree. Do you know what I mean? They're lovely and they're fragrant and they're godly and they bake and they are extroverts and they're able to welcome people in and they just seem to be superwomen. And that is not me on any level whatsoever. And so I really panicked and I just thought, I don't think I can do this. And when I panicked, I went back to my old ways of control. So I stopped eating again. And it started, the OCD came back as well. But this time there was no, my parents weren't there to force feed me spaghetti to help me. And that's one of the big difficulties of someone who has adult mental health difficulties, or particularly something like an eating disorder, which has addictive elements in it. Very hard to get someone when they're an adult the help that you could perhaps when they're younger, because you get to make your own choices.
Yeah.
So it got to the point where really I was dying and my body, my organs were shutting down. My hair was falling out. I couldn't walk. I couldn't stand. We had tried all kinds of avenues for getting help, but really I just didn't. I just did. I kept saying I would get better and I really couldn't. My grandmother died and I was very close to her and couldn't go to her funeral. And there was one night where Glenn had gone to bed and I was looking into the fire and I was looking at the readings that I'd picked out for my granny's funeral, but I wasn't there able to read them because I was too sick. And sometimes you see yourself as if from a distance, and it was as if I was looking down on myself, this skeleton sitting by the fire, this girl who had tried to make herself into someone who was worthwhile, tried so many avenues of the way that she looked, the grades that she got, being good enough for God, being thin, being, just you name it, I had tried it. And I was dying, it was like I was trying to find life for myself. And in the end, I was killing myself. And I cried out to God in that moment, not the headmaster God that I thought I knew, the God who wanted me to keep rules and who would keep out of my way, but I guess the real God of the Bible. And he's described in a book called Revelation. It's the last book in the Bible. There's a description of Jesus. Jesus is God's son. And in the Bible says, if you want to know what God the Father is like, you've got to look at his son. This is who you've got to meet. And I've been trying to relate to this sort of big idea of God without ever having really been introduced to his son. So I'd heard there was something about this guy, Jesus, and he died or something, but I don't really know how that connected to me. Anyway, reading in the book of Revelation, there's a description of him. First of all, it says that it gives you, it's a man who has like this vision of Jesus, a disciple, and he sees Jesus as someone who is radiant and beautiful and terrible. He's got eyes like fire and hair as white as wool, and he has the whole world in his hands. He is unlike anyone else, just majestic and stunning and powerful. And that captured me, first of all, because I'd always felt I was too much for everybody, too intense, but his intensity blew my intensity out of the water. And he was also described as a lion who is in charge of the world. And that was very interesting to me because I'd always felt like I needed to make sense of the world by taking charge of it myself. So OCD, washing, making things clean, sterilizing to keep the bad stuff out there. An eating disorder, making myself thinner, controlling what I ate to control my world, my body. Getting good grades or trying to look a certain way because I'm taking control, because I'm saying the problem is with me out there and therefore the solution is with me and I will fix it. But I couldn't ever do it. And the world seemed to be such a scary place. I had to do something about it. But here was somebody who was saying, no, you're not the Lord of the world. I'm the Lord of the world. And I hold that world in my hands. And I have good purposes for it and for you. And you can trust me. So that was amazing. But then as I read on, the lion is described, Jesus the lion, in another way. He's described as a lamb who has been slain, who has been broken. And I was like, well, how can you be a lion, roaring and terrible and in charge of the whole universe, and yet you come down to earth and you become like this lamb who dies? What on earth is that about? And Jesus comes to die on the cross because even though he is perfect and even though he is Lord of the whole universe, we are not, and we're separated from him. And all of the mess that I knew was there in me, but I couldn't really put words to, the mess, which is both people doing wrong things to me and me doing wrong things to them, and me saying, look, actually, God, I appreciate you've made me in this world, but if you could just shove off, I can sort myself out. Thank you very much. And all of those things that I was trying to fix in me were things that I couldn't fix. But Jesus says, look, I love you. I've never done anything wrong. And I don't want you to pay for your mess or to try and work out what gives you identity, to make yourself worthwhile by harming yourself. I will take all of the mess of the world and the sin and everything in it on my body. So you don't get harmed. I take it on my body. You don't take it on yours. And that for me was incredible, that this lion who is in charge and so powerful, yet makes himself into a lamb and is broken willingly for me. And not because he doesn't know who I am. He knows who I am. He sees through the masks. And that's funny, isn't it? Because so often in life we do put on masks. We can look like I did before I relapsed, shiny, successful. Here's a couple who are really gonna do great things together. That they've got it all together, and inside you're just a mess. And yet he sees through that, and he looks at you and he looks at me and he says, I love you. I'll come and I'll die for you. And it's not that you have to clean yourself up and then you come to me. You come to me for the bath. And I will tell you who you are. I will give you a value that cannot be taken away, because you're much more loved than you ever realized that you were. And you're made for something much more than you thought. But you've also, the mess that you've made is bigger than you think it is. And actually only God can fix it for you. And so I think that for me, meeting a person who was more beautiful than even anorexia, that was when things started to change. Because, in counseling and therapy, people will say things to you like, and counseling's very helpful, but they would say things like, what are the reasons you have for holding on to an eating disorder? What are the reasons you have for letting go? Well, the reasons for letting go would be you would have more energy if you ate more. People wouldn't be so worried about you. You would look a bit healthier, for example. But the reasons that I had for wanting to hold on to it were existential reasons. They were things like, I need something that tells me who I am. Anorexia feels like my very best friend. It makes me feel powerful, like I can control the world, like I can make sense of life and death, and I can override my body. Massive, massive, massive questions that simply looking better or being able to go out for a curry are not going to answer. But when I met Jesus, there's something bigger than the definition of me as anorexic or someone who is mentally disturbed or has OCD. It's a relationship. It's not just a set of rules. Otherwise it was like me relating to God the way I had been up until then, like he's a rule book, as if you can have a relationship with a highway code or something like that. Like God is a big highway code. He's not. He is beautiful, and he is Lord, and he wanted to know me, and he called me into his story, and he loved me, but he wouldn't leave me as I was either.
Thanks, Emma. This is so helpful. One thing I was wondering as you're speaking there at the end was, if someone was watching this and they were struggling with mental health and they were feeling very messy on the inside, one reaction might be, I couldn't possibly go to church. That would only make me feel worse. I mean, the image you described of the kind of the all powerful minister's wife could be something that someone might perceive about church generally, or that they would be judged by a self-righteous crowd. That it wouldn't be a safe place to go to get help or find any answers. Have you got any thoughts about that? Is it something you had to work through, or you've come across that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I suppose my biggest thing, the fear of the vicar's wife and so on, and the performing at the front of church and feeling like the gospel was for other people but not for me, that was all a big lie. But whenever I looked most religious, that was a big lie that I was believing. What I discovered was the truth about Christians. That Christians are the most messed up people. Everybody is, and everybody has. The Bible teaches that. The Bible says, look, the world is not the way it is meant to be, which means that our physical health is not the way it's meant to be, but neither are our brains. So actually, I'd always been worried that I could be judged by Christians for having mental health issues, but Christians have got a theology that says, absolutely, our brains are broken, and that's okay. That's totally, in many ways, totally normal. So I think that's a big thing. And I think as well, what is a Christian? Are they still a good person who's getting better? No, they're not. A Christian is somebody who recognizes that they're messed up and they need saving. By definition, they need a savior, they need Jesus. And that looks different to all of us. For some people, it'll be mental health struggles, and it'll be things like I have faced. For others, it will be, it'll be other areas. Maybe they don't struggle with mental health, maybe there are other things. But all of us have hearts that say, I want to be Lord, not God. And that's a problem. And so we all need a savior to come in. We all need this Lord to show us who we are and what we're made for. And being a Christian simply means that you go, I can't do it on my own. It's not that you say I'm better than everybody else. It's that you're not. You're messy and you need Jesus. And that's what unites us as a body. Now, I only discovered that whenever I started being real to myself and real to God. It happened the night that night. Sort of the fallout was, well, it's been years and years of the recovery process.
Yeah.
And part of that is coming along to church. It is starting to be honest about who I am. It is getting to know other people. I mean, I've said before, I'm an introvert, and I've always thought, I'm a bit scared of people. If they know who I am, they're going to run a mile. I'd run a mile. Or church is a place where it's full of judgment. What I discovered was that as I opened up to people one by one, they didn't have necessarily the same struggles as I had with eating or with, germs and things. But there were people who said, look, Emma, I'm messy too, just in different ways. But isn't Jesus amazing? And they weren't scared of sort of the mental health issues that I had. They said, and I think this is really helpful for people who want to help those who are struggling. Look, I don't really understand this anorexia thing, but I really want to get alongside you. Can you tell me, how do you feel, and how can I help? And they just loved me, because I didn't want somebody who was coming alongside me as a project. Who wants to be somebody's project? I don't need you to come and feel sorry for me and to pat me on the head and to give me a Bible verse. I want you to be my friend. I want you to listen to me and to stick by me. And I want you to tell me that it's okay to be messy and that you're messy too. And I want you to remind me that Jesus is real and he's there. And that is what church did for me. And I have found over the years, and it's still a work in progress, that the church community is absolutely vital. It's there that I've discovered that I can be who I really am, and other people will not run from me, because we have a Lord who says, you know what, this is what everyone has struggles. Everybody has this mess inside of them. That's why I've come. So here's a place where you can actually dare to be yourself, dare to be real, take off your masks, be with other people who are like you, and know you're loved. And look towards someone really beautiful, someone who gives you real hope, no matter what you're facing, no matter what your circumstances are. Jesus doesn't promise. He doesn't promise to fix your mental health issues. And I think that's quite important to say. Over the years, I've been working through a lot of different issues, and I've known a real freedom in many, many areas. But the heart that is still frightened and afraid and insecure, that's still my heart. And every day I wake up with that heart, and every day I have to go, Lord, would you please help me? Because I wake up and my emotions tell me the world is a scary place, and I'm not a very nice person, and I don't want to get out of bed, and everything's a bit hard. And I still suffer from periods of anxiety and depression, and times where my feelings are telling me that everything is rubbish. Being a believer does not take those things away, but it gives me a Lord who makes sense of them, who is with me in the storms, who promises to bring me through, who understands, and a Lord who has suffered in all of the ways that I have suffered, and he really does get it. Because often when someone's struggling, you want to say, oh, I know what you mean, or I've been there. And sometimes you can't say that. But Jesus is the God who comes down from on high, who makes himself one of us, who suffers in exactly the way we do. Why has he become a human? Because he walks in our shoes. So there's nothing that you can say, I've been through this, that he cannot say that he has also not been through. And to the nth degree. So there's a friend who really is with you at 3 a.m. when none of your friends are taking your calls. He's there. There's a friend who really can say, I understand, I've walked with you. But wonderfully, there also is a friend who is not just the broken lamb, but the Lord of the universe, who says, I have got purposes for you, and I will bring you through this. I will bring you out, and I can redeem even the junk and the mess. And a God who works through weakness and through brokenness. He is not a God who says, fix yourself up, act strong, come to me, get it together. He's a God who says, come as you are, and my power will be made perfect in your weakness. I will shine all the more brightly through the cracks in you. And people will, you know, the very things about you that you might hate the most, the very things about you think that are not redeemable, the darkest places, those are the very places where I will do the most work, and I will bring about often the most redemption.
Thanks, Emma. Let's go on to think then about positive mental health and how each of us tries to safeguard that in lockdown. Now, when you blogged on this, you talked about escaping COVID brain. I think it was the phrase you used, or something like that. I realised you were writing principally to people who are already Christians. So some of that will, I guess, creep in as we talk. That there'll be some things here where, for guests watching who are not Christians yet and just looking in, some of this might feel, well, that how do I make sense of that? Other bits would be more general. But the first one was about isolating physically but not mentally. So what did you mean by that?
Well, I suppose what we were talking about really about the need to be connected to other people. So particularly, I think if you're someone who struggles with mental health, the temptation is there already to isolate yourself. Certainly I find that, because there can be all sorts of um, misplaced feelings, like I feel ashamed of the way I shouldn't be feeling like this, or people won't understand, or, you know, and if someone, the way that I've spoken to you about, if someone sees who I really am, they're going to run a mile. So I think that's something we really, really need to fight against. And where we want to hide in on ourselves, we get trapped in our own brain and our own ways of thinking, our own faulty ways of thinking. So we need other people to reflect us the truth and to remind us of who we are, and to, um, just to bring us back to ourselves. So don't hold away, don't pull back from other people. I'm not saying you need to, join an online meeting and tell everyone everything about yourself, but have one or two close friends, people that you can open up to, and keep on being in contact with them. There are lots of different ways of doing it.
That's
And
very helpful. Go on, sorry.
yeah, I suppose you can be creative about it as well. Again, I'm trying to think with both hats on here about someone who's struggling with mental health and someone who's trying to help those who are struggling. If you're struggling yourself, don't make the mistake of thinking that you're messed up in a way that other people aren't. You really are not. And just talking can be so helpful. Plus, people actually need you. I know it's tempting to think, oh well, I'm not no use to anybody. I'm going to be down and all the rest, but that's not true. And you do need to get a fresh perspective. And there are lots of different ways of doing it as well. If you're someone who's trying to help someone who's struggled with mental illness, it might be that they don't really want to visit, or that's not possible because of COVID, or they're not good on the phone, or so there. You can do it by letter, you can do it by sending somebody a note. A friend of mine, both of us hate speaking on the telephone, so we leave each other voice messages, just on WhatsApp, because you can do it in about 3 minutes. You can say what you need to say. You don't have to think with your brain and get it down into a text. So things like that. But reach out. You need other people, and more than that, they need you.
You mentioned, Emma, don't feed your anxieties,
Mm.
which is quite a striking one because I guess none of us are trying to do that. So how might we fall into that trap? What is it, feeding your anxiety?
Well, I mean, there's loads of ways you might do it. Obviously, all of these are me just giving examples. I've never done anything like this myself. You might, for example, try Dr. Google. Dear Dr. Google, I have these symptoms, and he will tell you that he will tell you you have Ebola or something like that. So don't Google symptoms. You might have you might be someone who likes listening to the news nonstop. Yeah, listen to the news, but maybe keep it to one bulletin a day from a reputable news source. Is it really going to be helpful to you to be scrolling down the Daily Mail sidebar for 24/7? Probably not. Things like that. What are the sort of what are the things that you're telling yourself? Who are the people you're surrounding yourself with? What sort of things are you watching? What are you listening to? All of this, it is a bit like whatever. If you feed yourself if you feed yourself a load of sugar, you're going to be wired, aren't you? You're going to be, ooh. And if you feed yourself things that are going to be filling you with anxiety, then that's not going to be very helpful for you either. So just be sensible about what you're listening to, what you're reading, what you're putting in there.
And then you talk about being practical,
Mm.
and you talk about the importance of routine. Why is that, noticeable and important in this season?
Well, I think for a lot of us, one of the things that's difficult is we have lost our sense of routine, haven't we? And it's very easy for the hours and the moments to just blur into one. In the one hand, for some people, it feels like you've never got enough time. For other people, it feels like time is weighing endlessly on them. But the normal markers that we have of social contact and so on are gone. So it is helpful to be able to get into a pattern of behavior. Whether it is, okay, I'm going to wake up at this time, I'm not going to sleep in all day, I'm going to go for a walk, I'm going to get a bit of fresh air. Things like if you take medication, keep taking your medication, check that you've got it. Now is not the time to, don't try and make any big decisions at this moment. Be kind to yourself. This is a really difficult time for everybody, and it's hard. It's okay for you to feel like things are hard. They are. And it's really important to keep eating right and rest as much as you can, take the exercise and all the rest. But there is a sense as well where things are just a bit scary at the moment, and you can tick all the boxes and read all the right things and do all the right things and still feel like it's a bit rubbish. And that is okay too. It is a bit rubbish. Things are a bit hard right now. Go easy on yourself, be kind, treat yourself as if you would, again, that child that you're looking after or someone you love. When you talk to yourself, you're not going to be a sergeant major. Why am I so rubbish? Why am I still lying in bed? Why can't I do things the way you know? Things are hard, and we're doing okay. I'm just going to take it a day at a time, a step at a time. I don't need to think about next week or next year. I don't need to think about how long lockdown's going to manage. Right now, in this hour, in this moment, this is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to do it step by step. And that kind of, that I think is very helpful as well. And, Jesus talks about that in the Lord's Prayer. He said, the Lord's Prayer says, give us today our daily bread. Well, that's really wise. And what God is saying is, look, you cannot look too far ahead. You can't store up bread for tomorrow, or it's too much. It would be like if I gave you all the food you would eat in a year and I stuck it on a table and said, you're going to eat that in a year. You'd be like, no way. There is no way. That is impossible. That's far too much. The same with our worries and our days. If you put them on a table, you can't handle it. But one day at a time, walking with the Lord, an hour at a time, you can do this. So those are some, yeah.
Great, Emma. Thank you. When uh, we when we arranged this, we couldn't do this live. So this is now, for those watching right now, this is Wednesday evening. But for you and I, it's not. And so I just asked a few people what they might want to ask you in advance, because we couldn't do a sort of live Q&A.
I'm
And
so sorry about that. I would
oh
love
no, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah, no, we were so grateful for your time, and grateful to Glenn and whoever's currently looking after stopping a little boy from running into a truck.
YouTube. Not really.
Sorry.
YouTube.
Yeah. Okay. If we have a friend who we become aware is struggling with anorexia,
Mm.
how can we support them? I know you've touched on some of this already, but it would be helpful. That was a question that came in.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Very, very briefly, just to say, I've spoken about anorexia because that's a big part of my story. But there are various numbers of eating disorders. Anorexia is just one kind, so it's well worth being aware of that. The most common kind of eating disorder is where it's a mixture of all sorts, and bulimia is very, very common. Now, anorexia, quite often you'll be able to tell if someone's struggling from it because they'll lose weight. But there are a lot of eating disorders, for example, with bulimia, which is where someone will often eat a lot of food or ingest a lot of food and then burn it off or make themselves sick, where they'll often be at a normal weight. Or overeating, binge eating, where the person will be. So first of all, don't judge how a person's doing necessarily just on how they look, okay? And that's really important. in recovery times as well for people. You might find that someone suddenly starts looking a whole lot better. Now, your temptation would be at that point to step back a bit and to say, okay, they're doing moves better. Let me tell you what's going on inside the head of that person. Inside the person who is struggling, they're thinking, when I had an eating disorder, people knew I was sick. Part of this was getting help for the feelings I didn't know how to deal with by myself. And I needed to look sick for people to understand that and to give me the help. Now, my big fear is that if I look better, I have lost my way of coping. Um, and people are going to stop listening to me. All they care about is what I look like on the outside. So don't just gauge how someone is, and don't tie it all to how they look either. I would say always acknowledge if you think there is a problem, as you would with any other issue. I've noticed that you seem to be finding it very difficult to have meals, or you seem to be feeling quite anxious around food, or you've been skipping meals, or can you talk to me a wee bit about that? And leave an open-ended question. Be prepared for the person to respond very angrily or defensively, and don't take it personally. Get alongside them as a friend, and it's really, really important that people understand that you care about them. Eating disorders are ways of dealing with emotions. For me, it was like writing on my body something I didn't feel I could say with my mouth because I didn't know what I was feeling, or I didn't feel able to articulate it. What was really helpful for me is learning new ways of being able to speak out how I feel that doesn't mean just using food. And if I have someone who is a friend and comes alongside of me and really wants to get to know me and walks with me and is interested in how I'm doing and how I'm feeling, and not just in what I'm eating, then that provides me with an opportunity to see someone who really does care about me, who really does love me, and who really does see me as more than just my eating disorder. Because if you have an eating disorder, it also is a convenient label. It's an identity, and it's a bad identity, but it is an identity. And quite often folks who have eating disorders don't know who they are. I didn't know who I was. Who am I if I don't have this thing? So I need you as well to come alongside me and to see who I am outside of the ways that to encourage me in that way, to give me a vision for the person that I am that isn't connected to food and body and all of that. So those are some of the things I would say. I think it's ideal to try and get the person, if they're really struggling and they haven't got help, to go to the doctor, to go to the GP with them to help them. Because aside from anything else, you don't want to be in the role of a food enforcer, and nor should you be. You want to be a friend coming alongside. I always say the analogy is not of a rhino charging in and going, I'll fix this, out of my way, you need to do this and this and this. But neither are you an ostrich going, there's no problem here. They've said they're fine, therefore they're fine. I'm going to stick my head in the sand. You want to be a bit like a dolphin. You come alongside that person, you kind of nudge them. You nudge them and you pray for them and you walk with them. And you remember that you're not the savior. Jesus is the savior, but he can work absolute miracles. And you keep pointing them to him as the savior. You stay plugged in to Jesus yourself, and you support them in the treatment, and you're a friend. And sure, read about eating disorders, find out about them, ask the person, how can I help you? How can I love you best? And be aware that it's a mental health issue. So therefore, there are patterns and thoughts going on here. It's not just a matter of, sit down and have a Big Mac, things will be fine. There's a chemistry and a biological aspect to this, which means the person is actually trapped mentally as well. And just be aware of that when you're dealing with them. So so there may be times when they will need you to say no for them, or they will, to be honest, this is such a big question. There's so much written about it. Have a look at my blog. I've written quite a few articles and things on it. And feel free to email me if there's something specific there. But those are some of the things I would start with for how you could help.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Emma. And then in terms of people who struggle, who are Christians, just another question there was about how someone could think, well, I feel a sense of shame. That the fact someone might think I'm struggling with depression or another form of mental health issue, and that the fact I'm a Christian makes me feel worse in one sense, because I feel as though I shouldn't have this. I feel like there's all these reasons people are telling me that I should be joyful, and I've got Jesus now, but it doesn't feel like that. So how do we Yeah. Do you have any advice for someone in that situation? But also, I'm wondering how we deal with that as a culture within a church, so that we're a place where even if someone is not getting any better with their mental health, or they're getting worse with their mental health, they don't feel embarrassed about that, or a sense of shame for that, or guilt for that. Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, first of all, let's go back to what do we believe as Christians? What is our theology? Our theology is, in other words, what we think is in, we have, there's God created man and woman, and they made decisions and they turned their back on him, and the world all went a bit to pot. Okay, so the world is a broken place, and no one's going to argue with that, right? We see sickness and we see suffering, and our brains are broken, and our bodies are broken. Our relationships are not the way that we want them to be. We're not the people that we want to be. Everything is a bit messed up. So we expect people to have mental health issues, okay, for starters. So all of this stuff about, would you say to a Christian who had uh, epilepsy, or a Christian who had broken their leg in a skiing accident, all right, and how are you thinking your way out of this broken leg? What did you do? What was it that you must have done to cause that accident in the first place? Would you wouldn't bring a judgment value along it, and we shouldn't be bringing judgment values along with mental health either. Now, that said, there are some important distinctions. Mental health is difficult to deal with because, for one thing, with a physical problem, there's a beginning and an end to it, isn't there? You break your leg, here's the problem, here's the treatment, here's the end date, and here's the often. And mental health's not like that. Often it's hidden. It is something where it can be an ongoing thing. It is not something that's necessarily going to be cured. And so I think it's very important that as churches and as people, we recognize that both in ourselves. I might struggle with these things for the rest of my life. I might be, for example, bipolar, or I might have schizophrenia, or I might suffer from depression, and that may never go away. Um, but there are ways of finding help for it, and there are ways of dealing with it and managing it and telling myself the truth in it and getting help within that. And there is hope for me in that. And as a believer, I think as well, look, you don't believe what your heart tells you. My heart says, Emma Scrivener, you are a mess and you're shameful and you're rubbish. And it tells me that every morning without fail. Okay. But God's word and Jesus are true, and they tell me who I am, and it's not what I feel. And he says, you know what, before you had any issues, you're my beloved child, and you are worthy, and I have paid for you in my own blood, because I love you and I set my love upon you, and not because you are good or bad, or your mental health is good or bad, or anything else in between. I will never stop loving you. I will never leave you. I will walk with you. And um and and that is what gives you worth and identity and meaning, and not how well you're doing. And that is who Jesus is. He's the God who says, look, I'm big enough to handle all the mess. Come, bring it to me, and I will help you. We'll come through this together. So the guilt and the shame and all the rest of the other stuff that you might think comes along with it, well, that's an absolute lie. In Jesus, you are set free, but it's a one-off event where you're absolutely perfect, but it'll take a lifetime to work out that you feel like that. Like a beggar who is married to a prince, right? You're that beggar and you feel like you're rubbish and you feel like you're stinking and you're smelly and all the rest. But this Prince Jesus comes along and he marries you and he makes you a princess. You are a princess. Doesn't matter, what you feel about it. But are you going to feel like that princess the next day? No, you're probably going to feel like you're still smelly and you're still a beggar. Are you a beggar? No, you are a princess. You're dearly loved, but your brain will keep telling you the old stuff. It'll take time to live out your new identity, maybe a lifetime, but you are that new person in Jesus. And it's just that it's gonna, yeah, in this life, our brains will tell us something else sometimes, and that's why we need God's word, and that's why we need to meet up with other Christians, and that's why we need His Holy Spirit, and that's why, if you don't know Jesus, then please find out about him, because it would be a bit like me saying, I want you to act like you're in love with this person. You'd be like, well, what? No, I want you to meet this person and fall in love. Then all the rest of the stuff that I'm saying about mental health will make sense. But the main thing is, meet this Jesus guy, okay? He's going to blow your world apart. And yeah, yeah,
That's a
he's
great. Thanks, Emma. That's a great way to end, I think, with that invitation. Thanks so much for your time and energy, sharing all that with us. Thank you for your wisdom, and obviously for guys watching, you can continue to engage with what you've written through the books, through the blog. Yeah, just to say thank you, and we'll head back to what we've got next on the evening. Thanks, Emma.
Thanks, guys.
Hope that you can join us physically one day in Glasgow.
Bring it on. That would be amazing.
Well, thanks for joining us tonight for that interview with Emma Scrivener, and thanks to Emma for engaging so honestly and helpfully on this vital issue of mental health. We're just going to think for a few minutes at the close about a claim that Jesus made. And each evening, for the 3 evenings of Real Lives Online, we're just going to look at 3 statements that Jesus made about himself. The first one tonight is this. Jesus said, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." I don't know what you think of when you think of bread. You might think of bread as boring, as unexciting. You might think of the sourdough loaf that you've been perfecting in lockdown. But it's good to understand that in the ancient Near East, when Jesus made that claim to his first audience, having just fed them with a feeding miracle to demonstrate who he was, when he said the word bread, they didn't think unexciting. When he said bread, they thought life. Bread meant life. It was essential to life, and bread satisfied. When you had bread, you were satisfied. So Jesus is speaking to a bunch of people who know that they're searching for something that will satisfy them. And extraordinarily, Jesus is saying, without the bread he can offer, the bread of life, you will always be spiritually hungry and thirsty. That we're spiritual beings, and we'll have a thirst inside us, always wanting something more. We'll be hungry. We'll be spiritually starving without him. And for us, one of the things that's been going on in lockdown that we found so hard in the restrictions the past year is so many of the things in life that you and I go to that might give us satisfaction, that might fill us up and might quench our thirst in life, have been taken away. So much has been taken away. And Jesus is claiming here he has something he can offer us that will satisfy us so that we never hunger and thirst again. So what is this solution that he offers? Well, just think about the audacity of the claim. Jesus doesn't say, "Here is my teaching, and if you follow it, you'll never be hungry and thirsty." He doesn't say, "Live in a certain way, and you'll find this bread eventually, if you're good enough, if you're religious enough." No, he says, "I am the bread of life." It's an absolutely extraordinary claim to have the audacity that Jesus said this in history, that he never claimed to be a moral teacher or a guide for life. He's saying, "I am the bread which satisfies." He boldly claims that he came into our world from beyond our world, and he is the source of life, and through whom we can find life in all its fullness. I am the bread of life. And who does he offer this to, this satisfaction, this spiritual life? He says, "Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." So whoever you are, whatever you've done, even if you've never thought much about Jesus before, or you rejected him a long time ago, he's saying it doesn't matter. If you come to him, you'll find that he will offer you as a gift life in all its fullness. That is life knowing God, going through life in a right standing with God as your Father, and a life where you will be with God forever. Jesus said, "I will raise them up at the last day, whoever believes in him." He offers us life that lasts forever. And he offers it to all of us. So I want to just urge you to take up Emma's invitation. She said at the end there, didn't she, that she just wants people to go and see Jesus. And if you've never taken a good look at him, a lot of what she said might not make much sense. But why not take a fresh look at him with us at St. Silas Church? Join us this Sunday for Back to Church Sunday at 11 a.m. or 6:30 p.m., 11 a.m. on YouTube, 6:30 on Zoom. And following that, we're starting a new course, just 4 evenings on Zoom in March. It starts on the 9th of March, and it's called the Life Course. And it's just a chance to look at who is Jesus, why did he come, what does it mean to follow him. So why not join us for the Life Course on that first Tuesday evening on the 9th of March. Those words again from Jesus, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. Let me ask, what's your response to this claim from Jesus? What do you think? Thanks again for joining us, and I hope you'll join us again tomorrow night as we continue our real lives online.